Good morning, everybody. I need to walk around, but I'm told to stay near the mic, so this is like electric handcuffs right here. So eels are a little bit weird, but I have a question for everybody. Who here has ever eaten an eel? That includes sushi, unagi, baked eel, whatever. Okay, oh good. So this room already has a very intimate relationship with this animal. Okay, that's excellent to know. Some of you may, however, be wondering, why are we here to talk about eels? So thank you for your time to talk about eels today. My name is Chris. Beautiful. So first of all, let's just talk about eels, what they are. A lot of people are like, are they scary? Are they dangerous? Are they electric? Are they slimy? Out of all of those things, it's only the slimy one that applies to this animal. This is actually one of nature's most beautiful mysteries in the world. As far as we know, and we honestly don't know everything about this animal, they are migratory, hatching somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Many people think the Sargasso Sea. In the springtime, in rivers from Mexico up to Atlantic Canada, millions of tiny baby eels are transforming from a saltwater creature into a freshwater creature, coming into our creeks by the millions and heading upstream into rivers and streams and creeks all over. After a long life of 10, 20, 30 years, a female eel might be the size of my arm. She might be carrying within her 10 million eggs as she goes back downstream, finds her way to that spot in the ocean, and breeds. A mystery we still do not understand. But here's the important point for us. We read about in every ecological textbook about the interconnectivity of waters and oceans and watersheds, and it's beautiful. Eels don't just think it, eels live it. Eels are connectivity. They are the ambassador of the interconnectivity of the world. So this is such an important animal when we talk about that. But you could also ask on the next slide, you could also ask, okay, but what are eels doing for people? Why should I care about eels? Well, first of all, we just actually covered a little bit of the food thing, right? So there is, if managed correctly, there's a commercial or at least an edible part of this eel that we need to think about. Related to that is the fact that eels are treasured by cultures all over the world, for medicines, for foods, and for building that deeper relationship to that culture's waterways. Eel ranges cover half of North America, which means that it is an animal that means something special to many of us, maybe even all of us. And eels are important ecologically. Those little baby eels I mentioned are feeding aquatic ecosystems that are just waking up after a long, cold winter. And that big arm-long eel is an apex predator, helping to balance our ecosystems and keep them important. So eels are an ambassador to connectivity. They are a way for us to develop a deeper relationship with our ecosystems and with our many, many cultures that rely on them together. That all sounds great, but on the next slide, we bring the bad news. Eels have had a rough century. And if asked, well, what's the problem with eels on a classic test, the answer would be all of the above. I can point to climate change. I can point to pollution. I can point to overfishing. I can point to the fact that in the last century, we've done a lot to break connectivity. We've done a lot to build dams, poorly sized culverts. We've taken rivers and we've blocked them off from migrations, from people who rely on those rivers. So eels are also a symbol of some of the ills we have, of that lack of connectivity. This sounds like a bad news story, but we're here to think about hope. So on the next slide, we want to bring up the fact that we've got some really strong tools to help eels and ourselves. We've got a lot of great traditional knowledges, or I should say like academic Western ways of thinking. So for example, I grew up learning about population metrics and monitoring systems and strategic plans. A lot of that classic fisheries work doesn't seem to be working though. We are trying to conserve these eels, but we realize that we need to include many more people and many more ways of thinking. We need to include traditional ecological knowledge, and we need to include the indigenous relationships with waters, with eels, with animals. We need to put all of these tools together, not just one toolbox, but all of them. So eels are also an ambassador of cooperation and connectivity. Our hope is that if we bring all of these tools together, if we open up our hearts, if we open up our minds to different ways of thinking, on the next slide, ultimately, next slide, please, we can bring eels back.
Thank you, Bowser. My relationship with eels is a love story. At a certain stage in my life, like an eel, I felt I needed to leave the fresh waters of the Great Lakes and head to the ocean, maybe even mate. And I was in Nova Scotia, and I met a man, a remarkable man named Donald Marshall Jr. And Donald Marshall Jr., as I got to know him, revealed to me an unbelievable tragic history. Donald, a Mi'kmaq man, had been wrongly convicted of murder and spent 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And as I met him, he had just been going through the Royal Commission into his wrongful conviction. He was in the spotlight. The media attention was so heavy on him. All he wanted to do was go home and fish eels. Slide, please. We were in love. I thought, why not? This man has gone through an absolute nightmare. If he wants to go fish eels, I'll go fish with him. And here we were, knee-deep in boatloads full of those slimy eels that Bowser was talking about. And we had a wonderful time. The stars really aligned for us. And he brought me to this place called Mullagawatch, and here amongst these gang of gentle giants, these fearless warriors, these Mi'kmaq language holders who were all exercising their treaty rights, teaching us how to fish eel. This was our very first payday. Junior Marshall had found peace at last. He was earning a livelihood. He was carrying on the traditions of his ancestors. He was sharing the eels with elders. He was preparing community feasts and teaching young ones how to fish respectfully and honor the sustainable harvesting of adult eels, not baby eels. And he felt this belonging that he had craved for so long. And we had such a blast roaming around, looking for eelgrass. It was a wonderful adventure. And every time there was heavy rain, he would put his hands together and he'd go, "Lots of eels tomorrow, baby." Side piece. Unfortunately, that piece was short-lived. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans did not recognize Donald Marshall's treaty right to harvest and sell eels. And in 1993, we were charged with 3 counts of 3 counts under the Fisheries Act. So if you can imagine, a man that had been wrongly convicted of murder, spent 11 years in prison, now had to face the courts again in order to protect his treaty rights. We were really concerned about the well-being of Donald Marshall, and I knew that I was in trouble because I was the white girl in the middle of that photo. Donald was the one in the yellow pants. I was committing an illegal act by harvesting eels. I didn't have the treaty protection that he did. Anyways, his courage was remarkable. Our gear had been confiscated. Our hearts were broken, but he had the courage, he had the confidence, and the support of the Mi'kmaq chiefs to go and defend his peace and friendship treaties at the Supreme Court. And on behalf of his nation, we went all the way to the Supreme Court, and once again, Donald Marshall Jr. was vindicated. The fallout from the Marshall decision in 1999 was extraordinary, and in what should have been a celebration and rejuvenation of treaty relations, instead turned into decades of jurisdictional conflict, violence, blatant disregard for Indigenous rights, and insidious racism toward Mi'kmaq harvesters. So we rallied together. Slide, please. We are people who persevere. For decades, we have resisted Indigenous oppression and exclusion from resource rights management. We are an interdisciplinary network of youth, elders, leaders, scientists, storytellers, harvesters, advocates, academics who love eels, and we have all found harmony in our diversity and our connection through our love of eels. We know eels heal. Slide, please. Our work is focused on Indigenous-led collaborations to mobilize the well-being of eels in all habitats and in all stages of their magnificent life cycles. Slide, please. We are dedicated to transformative change, leveraging our positions of power and privilege to drive the systemic shifts locally, regionally, nationally. We dream big. Our multifaceted approaches include community-based monitoring, land and sea-based learning camps. Junior Marshall held cultural camps for kids in trouble with the law for many years, and this model is one that we can see as being a great one for eel mobilization. Habitat restoration, endowed research centers for Indigenous science, governance, and social justice, revitalization and reconnection ceremonies. Our collaborations will bring forward intergenerational hope. Slide, please. We are guided by the teachings of Edawaптамunk, Tuaid Seeing, Niduklamik, Sustainability, Misit Nogama, All Our Relations, and Don Wadabeksi, Knowing Where You Come From. And we work in solidarity to recognize and reclaim Indigenous knowledge, laws, languages, and governance in our experiential learning and our transformative research alliances. Together, we will craft pathways for intergenerational healing and vibrant nation rebuilding. My life has been dedicated to honoring the legacy of Donald Marshall Jr., to heal with eels. Our commitment, our collaboration will bring eels back.
What is working now? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jane. So, I think that Jane's story is an excellent example of how eels have already helped to achieve this form of transformative change through reestablishing Mi'kmaq rights to harvest natural resources to earn a moderate livelihood beyond just food, social, and ceremonial purposes through that Supreme Court decision. And we think that eels have a lot more to offer. And so to talk about our outcomes, of course, the outcomes that we hope to achieve is to restore eel populations and return eels to the many parts of their historic distribution where they've been extirpated. But of course, this isn't just about eels. We think in doing that, we will have to restore freshwater habitat. We'll have to restore freshwater connectivity. And that will be a broader benefit of achieving this for American eel. We will also be restoring Indigenous relationships with American eel. That is a benefit in those cultural practices. But this is where, like the eel's life cycle, our work starts to get a bit circular, because another thing that will come out of this is we are expecting to restore Indigenous responsibilities, Indigenous authority over habitat and fisheries management, and Indigenous leadership in those roles. And reestablishing those leadership roles is what will bring about this transformative change. One example of that would be in Canada. We have 900 hydropower dams. About 700 of those operate in violation of the Fisheries Act without authorization. And bringing those into compliance will require significant mitigation, restoration resources being brought into those systems that will benefit not just eels, but many other species, and creates an opportunity for Indigenous people to play those roles in monitoring, in mitigating harm from hydropower. Those 700 dams are ones where no consultation has occurred, for instance. So that's one dimension of transformative change, and we can apply the same approach and pathway to change to commercial harvest, fisheries management, and so on. And so we have a very clear pathways to how we're going to achieve that, particularly the first couple of steps over the first 2 years to broaden our organizing through Eels Back as an Indigenous-led initiative. We've been doing this for a couple of years and organizing a smaller group, 20, now maybe 30, but we recognize we've not yet engaged with and involved many other knowledge holders, many other leaders, elders, youth, across many more Indigenous communities. And so we're really trying to grow this initiative to give it that momentum to bring about those systems change. And so we know what we need to do over those first couple of years. And by bringing those other people into the room, they will help shape Eels Back and give it form and prioritize what actions it will take and whether it will focus on knowledge sharing, on monitoring, on research, on advocacy, all of the above. We need to bring others into the room to make those decisions. And so, for instance, in the first year, by next fall, we hope to host a much larger gathering of 100 people and many more communities. We need some staff to support that. We know what it takes to bring those people together, particularly when many of those people may be youth or elders and not have the funding to participate in a gathering like that. And we see over 5 years that growing from 100 to 200 people, and over a 5-year period, a budget of almost 2.5 million, with staff in both Canada and the US to support that. Now, we don't yet know whether Eels Back will become its own incorporated entity that can stand alone and do this work, or if it will be more of a loose network. We need to bring other people into the room to decide that. In the meantime, what we do need are ways to host those funds, hire those staff, manage this, and I work with the Canadian Wildlife in Canada. We're prepared to do that as a fiscal sponsor for Eels Back, and do it in support of Eels Back, not in direction of Eels Back. So, for instance, if we hold funds and a staff is hired on CWF payroll, they would present themselves as Eels Back staff. And we have a couple of leads on an American partner who can do the same on the US side of the border.
Okay, so hello. Just one more. Also we're joined today also, Shoshana shared our names, and this is also Dolcy Meness of Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg Guardians Program, and Pierre-Luc Bastien, who is the lead biologist at Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg. So I want to just continue on with our describing some of the events that we've thus far put together. So about a year and change, September 2024, there was a meeting called Restoring Pimisi, hosted at Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg, and that is where we invited a number of partners from the Algonquin Anishinabeg nations to come together and just knowledge share and sort of talk about the state of eels. And then in March of this year, a group of Algonquin Anishinabeg as well as Kanien'kehá:ka people traveled to Mi'kma'ki to learn from the Mi'kmaq there about their areas of concern with eels. And then most recently, a few months ago in October, a bunch of us traveled down to the Delaware River watershed in Lenapehoking and participated in some eel activity there. And so Dolcy will share just a little bit about her experience participating in those meetings.
So the one that happened in October with the Delaware River, it was like an honor and really a powerful moment to be there, because, our people used to travel all over the place and we had connection with eels, just like eels and us. We traveled all over the place. We had homes in certain spots. We'd meet in different places to gather and, to mate and go different places there, right? So it was a really powerful moment because I've only heard about eels through history and archaeological sites. So I learned that in Ottawa River, there was a bunch of eels. And when I work in archaeology over there, it was kind of like a shock to me that I didn't know about it before. And like how some of my older knowledge keepers on the reserve had one or two instances where they heard about eels. So having gatherings like this brings people together, native and non-native, to come together to talk about eels and talk about the revitalization of a keystone species that was once here, right? So it's important that if they were there before, they should be here again. So it was a really powerful experience to see it in real life, to get able to hold one, just see how versatile and resilient they are. They are the mirror image of people.
So just on that note, we build from our ancestral knowledge. We draw on the teachings of our ancestors, our language, our culture, our cultural practices. We're sort of a network of care for one another as well. These are photos of some of our participants. So on the right here, on my right, you're right too, I think. Whatever. Yagana Halista, who is a grandmother from Aguasasne, and she brought 3 of her granddaughters to our gathering because the only eels they ever see in their territory are shredded by turbines. And so this was the first time they've seen living eels that are healthy and well. And they talked about how transformative that was for them to be able to experience that. And it gave them hope and even more momentum as they work with their community to ask the regulators for safer passage for eels. And then there's also grandparents passing on knowledge to grandchildren and retrieving and sharing what we can. So as much as it is about restoring that intergenerational knowledge transfer, it's also about providing access to rivers that people have been removed from. So the United States and Canada have these histories of forcibly removing Indigenous people from their territories, as many of us know. And so it's about building that reconnection. And there is also the community gatherings kind of give direction to leadership. So there was a band council resolution from Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg that was issued just about a year ago to the day that called on the federal government to come into compliance with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as the Fisheries Act, to create safe passage for eels and recognize that the story of the eel is also the story of how people have been removed from their stewardship roles, from their spiritual roles, from their traditional knowledge. And so the Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg leadership was interviewed and issued that band council resolution, which you can read online. And it has all the details about what has happened to eel and what the communities are calling for. But it's very important to note that that came from a community gathering, right? So that comes directly from the people. And I want to just share one story. So you heard Beijing Menans, one little seed that Bowser talked about in terms of the female eel. So a large female eel is carrying conservatively 10 million eggs. And a little story here was that when we went to the Delaware River in Lenape-Hoking a few months back, this young man is a member of a Lenape Nation, the Delaware Nation, out of Oklahoma, again, forcibly relocated from Pennsylvania, New York, all the way to Oklahoma. A few youth from that community joined our eel gathering, and Tristan located the largest female eel that he could find, and quietly and subtly, his action was he had to purchase the eel from the private landowner who manages the weir, but he released that eel to the ocean. So that's 10 million eggs that are making their way to the ocean. We hope they make it through all the other barriers. And so that's the sort of inspired change that our actions are bringing, and we hope to grow that everywhere and for people to pay respect to the many generations that survived from Pimizi, which means eel in Anishinaabe. Miigwech Bizindawik.
There's a small thing that I wanted to add on the presentation to kind of put the place of the Anishinaabe people in the fight for eels. I'm not Anishinaabe. I've had the great honor of my life to be working for the Kitigan Zibi Anishinabeg First Nation for about 6 years now. And what I've learned through the 6 year there is that the eels were so important for the Anishinaabe people, but today, when you talk about eels to the youth or to the odd hunters that you know, they don't know anything about it. Sadly, because of dams, among other things, the connection has been completely cut between the Anishinaabe culture and their relationship with eels. And when you dig deep enough, you're able to jostle the collective memories, and some information comes out. In a symposium like the one we did in Kitigan Zibi in 2024, we heard from an elder that she heard from her grandma that when the eel was migrating, the river around Kitigan Zibi used to turn black with eels, is the term they would use. And today we don't see any eels at all. We did a big eDNA project and electrofishing project this year between Lake of Two Mountains and about the Petawawa. It's a very long strait of the Ottawa River. We found one eel, about Elmer. So that's just telling how disconnected the community and all the nations of the Anishinaabe communities, nations, have been separated from their one of their most important food source. Another thing I've learned through my years in Kitigan Zibi is, surprisingly enough, we hear a lot about the beavers and the moose as being a good food source, very important food source. What I've learned is that actually the food source that used to last the longest throughout the winter, because eventually all that good jerky turns bad at the end of the winter, was eel. Smoked eel was what was carrying the communities and the families throughout the harsh winter that we have here. So most people around KZ don't eat smoked eel anymore. And we want to bring that relationship back. And it's through the networking that we want to do that we can hopefully get to eat smoked eels again in Kitigan Zibi.
Hi, I'm Tim Abbott, and thank you all for this. This has made me think of my childhood wading through eelgrass and stepping on some of those adult creatures long ago. My knowledge of eel biology is a layperson's, and so I wonder if some of you could help me understand what really constitutes an impassable natural barrier. We've got waterfalls of various sizes. I know that eels can be terrestrial for a little while. It occurred to me that Niagara Falls seems to be the big barrier keeping the rest of the Great Lakes from having eels naturally find their way there, but the watershed that I'm part of is the Housatonic in western New England and eastern New York, and large sections of it have hydroelectric dams on it, and then there's a couple of big natural barriers. My suspicion is that without those barriers, eels would have come the furthest inland. But can you help me a little understand sort of what natural barrier is hard for an eel? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, almost nothing. Niagara Falls would be a good example of that, although there's traditional knowledge that suggests eels would have gone into the upper Great Lakes through the upper Ottawa River watershed and some overland connections. Niagara Falls might have been fatal on the outmigration, so that might have been an ecological sink. But juvenile eels up to about 10 centimeters can climb a vertical concrete surface if it's wet. Seen some of the work that Nation Wendat are doing north of Quebec City. I mean, there's a 50-meter falls with a rock face on the side that eels were known to climb up and around. What you might think about of those natural barriers as a bit of a natural funnel where there might be fewer eels upstream of that, and we see that with dams today. We don't know how eels get around some of these dams, but a recent study in the Lake Champlain watershed showed that on average in each of the tributaries, there are eels past 3 dams. And yet, we see this in the Ottawa River watershed, population density would be much lower after each one. So I think opening it back up is going to open up a lot of habitat, but where you have some of those natural barriers, especially very big ones, there still might be few eels upstream of that historically.
This is somewhat related or a follow-up, and also speaks to my knowledge about this, but from a dam perspective, would it be requiring complete removal in order to establish that connectivity, or is there retrofits that can be done to, or do we know?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question that will be important for many operators to hear. And no, it doesn't require complete removal. It doesn't imply no more dams ever either. There's a way to build eel passage to go up for the inland migration. And we're working very hard, and there's very interesting work that is being done to make the downstream migration much easier on eels. There's a lot of things that can be done. There's eel-friendly turbines that exist. Natel is a great company that makes a huge, we're not talking small 50 kilowatt turbine. We're talking massive structural turbines that could go in dams like Carillon and stuff like that. So there is way, there's costly way, there's less costly way, there's there's eel ladders. You probably heard about eel ladders. You know that we now know that eels can climb almost vertical face if they are wet and slightly rigid, rugged. So there's a lot of different model of eel ladders that exist. Some of you might have heard about those salmon cannons that just shoot cannon atop the dam. There's many different ways that can be done. And for the downstream migration, we know that most eels migrate at night. So we know we have a concentrated area in the day that risk having most eels. So if we know that between 10 and 4 is the most migration that happens, we can maybe modulate the turbines, which turbines are being used the most by the eels. Maybe we don't have to turn all of the turbines down. Maybe we can shut one turbine per night, and that would limit 80% of the casualties. So there's lots of things to do, and the dam operator, and for example in Ontario, the Ontario Power Generation and Hydro-Quebec needs to be in the conversation, needs to be in with good intention, not coming there backward, but needs to be to believe in the stable, and needs to believe in this network we're working to bring back the eels. And bringing back the eels, to come back to your question, does not mean less money for the government, does not mean blocking project. It means thinking project differently, thinking project with a more forward thinking way than what we're doing right now and what has been done with that kind of a grandfather application of we've been there forever so we can't change. This is a thing that needs to be thought differently with new blood, with Indigenous people at the center of this conversation.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Only one for the presentation. Leora and I have had a couple conversations with my cousins who are in Besquetamukudi territory. Just one of the things that we're doing in Maine is taking down a lot of dams, and I want to make sure that we make ourselves available so we can connect as well later on. But one of the programs we do in Besquetamukudi and Bonawapskeg, Passamaquoddy and Penobscot territories, we hire alver fishermen and women who will catch their quota wherever they need to and then go above the dams and release them. And funding is coming through, so it's a suggestion. I think a lot of funders like that idea because as one of the only eel fishermen in my own tribe, it's a beautiful meat. I had some last night actually here. But it's one of those resources that I grew up with, and a lot of people don't realize how important it is to our culture and our responsibility to make sure that they're living their cycle, because that's what we're here for, is to make sure that they're living through. So only one for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. That is a beautiful point to make, and thank you for making that point. And you've heard a whole bunch of sort of levers. And one of the great things that we're trying to do with Eels Back is make sure that all of those levers are available. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to eels, just like we heard from Pierre-Luc. There's not even a one-size-fits-all for dams. So some partners are going to be operating with different tools. Those tools might be focused on education. Those tools might be focused on catch and pass. Those tools might be focused on working with local dam operators. But one of the things that we're really trying to embrace with Eels Back is to meet partners where they're at when they come into this organization and to lift everybody's tide in whatever way works for that community and that waterway. So thank you for bringing that up.
I got one question. So what is their principal diet? Because I remember as a kid, there used to be eels in Donawaga. A lot of people didn't eat them for whatever reason. I always heard that, well, they're scavengers, and I don't know if that's true or what.
Eels will eat, if it fits in their mouth, they'll eat it. Will they scavenge? Absolutely. Are they also phenomenal predators? 100%. So I would say, again, all of the above probably fits pretty well. Many people think of eels as like, oh, that's a trash fish. Oh, that's a mud fish. Oh, that's a scavenger. They kind of think down on it. Nothing could be further than the truth. Actually, a very, very top predator needs good water quality to thrive and is sort of an indicator of a healthy ecosystem, not the other way around.
If there's one favorite food for eels, it's probably crayfish. Because they burrow in sediments, they go under rocks, they go where the crayfish are, and they can access crayfish that are hidden from other species. So invertebrates, looking at what's in the gut contents of eels, if there's crayfish there, they'll be full of crayfish, much more so than other fish.
While that's making its way over, otters and large raptors also love to eat eels. So if you love them, you should love eels too.
Just thank you. Yeah, this is really interesting to learn more about eels. And some of the mystery, I guess, around the species of what they do out at sea. And so I'm wondering how you frame maybe some of the challenges that are happening out there outside of your project, and how you integrate that into your work.
Well, they're not outside of our project. The ocean is also part of our project, right? So
There we go.
have partners that are working in those coastal communities, and the question mark is, how will climate change impact the Gulf Stream? That is everybody's question, right? So the Gulf Stream brings all those organisms up in the spring, and so you know, we need monitoring with that too, right? And we need Indigenous leadership in those areas, and we need Indigenous perspectives on the ocean and how to manage our relationship with the ocean from people who know how to do that, who have been here for, you know, more than 200 years.
As my job, I'm primarily a teacher. Or really, I'm a science teacher that's trying to dress up as a fish biologist here. And one of the great things about eels is that I can talk to students who live 200 miles from the ocean. And to them, the ocean might be a lovely picture. But all of a sudden, these baby eels come in the spring, and suddenly it's not just a picture. It's, here's an animal that traveled 1,000 miles to be in your neighborhood creek from the ocean, and we have now opened up a conversation and opened up an opportunity for learning that is incredibly authentic, place-based, and real for those students in a way that I would not have been able to do otherwise.
One more quick question back here.
Okay. Good morning. Phil Huffman with the Quebec Labrador Foundation. Thank you for the terrific presentation and really inspiring stories. As a couple of you know, there are a few of us here who are part of a big transboundary partnership working on connectivity that's been more terrestrially oriented, but it's evolving into more of a holistic vision of connectivity in all of its forms. And I'm keen to talk more with those of you who I have and those of you who I haven't about that. And just seeing that there's, I think, some who knows what kinds of opportunities related to all that. I guess my quick question is, I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about the annual gatherings that you've had over the last couple of years and what your vision for those are going forward beyond what was in the brief remarks of who's been involved, who you hope to be involved, what the outcomes are that you're looking for from those sorts of gatherings, and ways of sort of weaving all of this with other efforts that are going on. Thanks.
Sure. And I know I have to be quick, eh? Like a minute? Okay. So the initial conversation, I mean, this is intergenerational. So there were elders from Kitigan Zibi in the 90s who were pushing for eel restoration. A lot of our communities, ancestors, and relatives have known about this problem for decades. And more recently, the policy lever at the global level is suggesting that all anguillid species, and by the way, there's only one anguillid species that comes into North America, so this is the only one we have. There are 19 globally, but the IUCN recently recommended that they all be listed for protection. And the federal government recently declined to list American eel under SARA, Species at Risk Act. And so the momentum is kind of, the gatherings are a place to kind of share, again, what is the state of the community that's coming? What is their connection? What is their memory? What do they need? And we're starting to kind of like, you might not know this, but when eels encounter obstacles, they ball together, right? They ball together, they create a ball, and they move through the water or across land. So I kind of see our gatherings as doing that. We're creating that eel ball effect to, make this giant wave that it's unacceptable for the species to be extirpated any longer in its territories, and it needs to be on the road to recovery and not the road to extinction, which is a dominant narrative that some people are willing to accept, and we are not.